to say that welcome to the January 4th meeting of the Pembroke School Committee. We'll call to order at 7:30. Just remind folks that the meeting is being recorded and is published to our website within 24 hours of the meeting. So for people to review, obviously it's recorded. We use it for our meeting minutes and as part of just keeping the record for our meetings. Just so aware, I think, in fact, I know there was some communication that has gone out about why we're meeting remotely. This wasn't a planned meeting. We only had, and then we had to do one thing on an agenda to get a letter out, which I'll talk about in a moment. But because of that, and we thought it would be a very quick meeting, we thought we'd meet remotely rather than having administration and others show up at North Pembroke Elementary School for about 15-20 minutes. Rather than doing that, we thought we'd do it remotely. And clearly, since we met on, I believe it was the 21st of December, the world has changed again as the pandemic continues to, I think, dominate a lot of what the administration is doing and what we talk about at this committee. So our plan as of right now still remains to be back meeting in 3 weeks on the 25th at North Pembroke Elementary. Obviously, if things change, we will let folks know, but our plan is to get back to in-person meetings on the 25th. Because of what has happened, and clearly there's been, a large increase in cases since we last met. We had put on the agenda an additional item for the administration to give an update on what our numbers look like, what was done over Christmas vacation, because there was a significant amount of activity and planning, especially over the last 3 days or 3 weekdays and about the last 5 calendar days of the Christmas break, especially by some of the administrators who are on today. Superintendent Obi, Assistant Superintendent Bruss did a lot of planning and distribution of materials, which Erin will talk about in a minute. But I just want to take a moment to, acknowledge their work and that they did over those days, from when I think it was Wednesday, when I first talked to the superintendent about what was going on from DESE with regard to distribution of test kits and additional masks for staff and support staff, or including support staff. From then, a lot of activity happened. So that I want to just thank them for all of their work. They took time away from their families to make sure that they kept the district running and got the district off to what, at least for the first 2 days, knock on wood, has been as smooth as it can be in light of the situation. I know people could say with numbers and things like that it's not smooth, but when you look at districts very close, Weymouth has canceled school for tomorrow. It tells you that what has gone on between our administration, our staff, in the whole school community, and keeping us in school. So wanted to start off with that. Also wanted to flip the agenda in case people don't want to watch us walk through a letter that we'll be sending, and I'll explain what the letter is in a little bit. Why don't I have the superintendent update everyone on the current numbers. The last thing I will say, and then I will shut up, I promise, for a while, is there is a significant amount of misinformation still going on, and I've seen some over the past 24, 48 hours. I don't want to get into intent or anything like that, because that's purely speculative, and I like to deal as much as I can in factual information. If you have questions, please reach out to your building administrators. Please reach out to the administration. They will answer your question to the best of their ability based upon the information they have at that moment. Numbers change, details change, as we saw. Since we met on the 21st, CDC guidance has changed. This Commonwealth has changed some of their opinions as far as what they're thinking and where they're headed. So if the first thing I'll say is the administration, principals, assistant principals, and the folks here will give you the most current information. They will also tell you where to go on our website for other information that is current. Please go to the sources, I should say, rather than anything else. If you have questions, it's critical that we continue to make sure we get the right information out there so people can make the right decisions for their family. Everyone's going to make different decisions based on their situation, but we want to make sure we at least give you the facts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, If people have questions during the time, Erin, you want scinfo@pembroke12.org?
So I have the chat open. If people want to post questions in the chat, I'm happy to answer them as we get to them. I'm navigating a bit of a funky technology setup today. You'll see my name is in here twice. So in order to share and not freeze, I have to have two computers open. So I think it might be easier if people have a question, just to put the question in the chat box. Please understand that the chat is public. So I would caution you about disclosing any of your own personal health information or that of your child. But if it's something that we can answer in the course of the meeting, we absolutely will. If it's something that makes more sense for me or myself or Mary Beth or Jess to touch base with you afterwards, we'll do that as well.
Yep, and the other thing I would just say is, just so people are aware, if you have a nickname or something in your name, just please state your name, because that has to end up into the record, just so people are aware. So sorry, Erin, I will let you.
So I'm just going to start. I have a couple of slides to share, but I'm going to start just to talk a little bit about what Mike referenced as far as the work that happened prior to school opening yesterday, and the partnership, I think that's a nice word, with DESE as far as supplies and test kits. So we were notified just at the beginning of winter break that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education had procured KN95 masks for staff. They had supplied each district with the ability to pick up at a distribution location. Ours happened to be Quincy, so it wasn't so bad. What is about an 8-week supply of masks. So here in Pembroke, we have picked up 12,000 KN95 masks. They are in every one of the buildings for any staff member that is interested in using them. 5 come in a package. They have given us enough for, again, a 6 to 8 week supply. Again, KN95 masks are to be used once. If you use it a second time, you must wear a second mask over it. So again, the supply is variable depending upon whether you use the mask once or you use it twice. In addition, we were fortunate to get word from DESE about the opportunity for staff to have access to test kits prior to returning to work on Monday. I will be the first one to tell you that the timing and accuracy of that information was anything but excellent. So we received word on Wednesday that there would be test kits to be picked up, to be distributed to districts. The conversation that we had with Rob Curtin at DESE on Thursday was that we would be receiving 450 kits here. Each kit contains 2 tests. The intention was to give them to any staff member interested in testing before returning to work on Monday. We then found out that those test kits were not available for pickup on Friday as they had originally intended. So test kits were able to be picked up on Saturday morning. At this time, our pickup location was not Quincy, it was Franklin. So I want to take a second just to thank Mike Evans, who works over at Hobbamock, for being our pickup and delivery driver for all of these items. He, we call it, he answers every time, and I'm so appreciative of that. In addition to the change in pickup time, the amount of test kits given to each district was also changed. So the DESE's original order of 200,000 kits was not fulfilled. So we received only 270 test kits here in Pembroke. We have far more staff than that here. We have about 389 staff members, give or take. So again, we didn't receive enough tests for every staff member to get a test. DESE gave you a couple of options to problem solve that. The first one was to prioritize student-facing staff. The second was to open the kits and split them into 2 tests. Mary Beth and I did open one of the kits just to see kind of what it looked like, because all of the ones on the market are a little bit different. I have some test kits at home that would be really funky to split. These ones in particular, each item was individually wrapped. So splitting them wouldn't have been that big of an issue, but there was only one set of directions in the box. So we here chose not to split up the kits. So any educator that came to pick up a test kit on Saturday or Sunday, Mary Beth and I were here to distribute, answer questions, take feedback. They received a full kit of 2 tests. We were able to give everyone that came that was interested in a test for Monday morning a test. Again, the communication that we sent to staff prior to that about test pickup explained when to test and who to report your test results to. Again, we ask that you report them to your school nurse as well as your local Board of Health. I will just piggyback on that and say a lot of what we are seeing here for student positive cases are on at-home tests. It's important that not only do you notify us, but that you notify the Board of Health as well. So the Board of Health only receives information through Maven, that state database that we've talked about time and time again, and that database is only updated for lab tests. So if you're home testing, you should call both your school nurse as well as the local Board of Health to let them know that you have a positive test result. Our nurses have been incredible, both with staff and with students. And I know anybody that has been in the dashboard over the past 2 days sees that it changes quite frequently. Our nurses have been returning call after call and email after email. I feel very confident at 7:40 on Tuesday night that the dashboard is very accurate and reflective of our current cases at this moment. Again, it is a rolling number, right? So I think I saw somewhere that, the school has 80 new cases in the past 2 days. We started school yesterday morning with 42 active cases already from over break. So right now, there's 91 in the dashboard, and I'll show you in my slides, some fall off each day. So it is a rolling average. As students come onto the dashboard, other students come off. They're not unique. It's not new instances in particular. So I'm going to share my screen on my other computer. Hopefully that is successful. We will see. Okay, so I think you guys can see it and I can see you, so that's helpful. Just to talk about our student cases, as I said, as of 2:30 today, this is where we're at. It's important when you're logging into the dashboard just to take a look at the bottom. We do timestamp it every time we update it. I will be honest, for the past 2 days, I have been in there predominantly for the entire day with updates from the school nurses and from the Board of Health. So it is important to check the timestamp on that. Right now, we do have 92 active student cases. You can see the breakout there by building. Again, 15 at Bryantville, 15 at Hobbamock, 11 at North, 6 at the middle school, and 45 at PHS. I want to note, as we've talked about in the past, only one of these cases is new to us from break. So all of these 92 students 91 of these 92 students did not return from winter break. There was just one student that was here yesterday that is positive today. So again, we've talked a lot about contact tracing and what that looks like. On the state side, they're not continuing to contact trace on the state site. Our nurses do still reach out to everybody and contact trace for our classroom settings. So again, 92 out of 2,566 is just about 3.6% of our population is currently actively positive with COVID. I thought it was important to show you how the cases fall off. You'll see, again, we've seen very few new cases to us in the past 2 days. You can tell by the 5-day isolation period as they start to fall off that everybody is off by the time we come back to school on Monday. Every case that we have now is resolved by the time we come back to school on Monday. I think that just shows there was obviously more testing that happened following the break, travel, family gatherings, all of that. Though this is a increase, and I know the town's seeing an increase, these aren't the largest numbers that we've seen in our buildings. Again, you'll remember when we met earlier in December, we were talking about a 37 at North at the time. So again, our nurses have been incredible working with families and with staff. I'm going to show you next the staff rates. So currently we have 17 staff members with active COVID cases. You can see the breakout there by building. That's just over 4.5% of our total staff. Again, there were 7 cases that were picked up from the at-home test kits that we provided for staff on Saturday and Sunday. The other 10 cases were already positive prior to that testing opportunity. So again, that is not a huge number of staff positive in any one building. Substitute coverage in general has been very difficult this year and last year. We are not seeing a higher than normal absentee rate for our teachers. There's a lot of coverage happening in our buildings. Again, with 17 teachers absent, I will say there's 5 other staff members that are caring for a family member with COVID or a relative with COVID within their household. And then, so that's about 22 COVID related absences for today in particular. There's another 10 or 12 staff members that are absent for other reasons. So 36 to 38 to even 40 or 45 staff members is an average number of staff members absent over the course of a day for us. I'm not seeing anything amongst staff attendance that is alarming to me at this point. We have great teachers in our buildings that have been doing class coverage. A lot of our curriculum supervisors, our assistant principals and principals have been doing class coverage to make sure that students have an adult in the room with them. As far as vaccination rates, I think it's important to talk a little bit about where we are at. So we did say we would update this weekly. This is as of today. So you can see here at the high school, we have 74.26 of the population vaccinated. That's just about 1% higher than the last time I reported it to you on 12/21. So it's not moving very quickly at the secondary level, but it is moving a little bit. The nurses do continue to download this data through SNAP, which is our interface with the state MIS database. I'll make a little public service announcement that we have made before in the past. If you opted out of the state database when you received your vaccination for your student, if you want to reach out to the school nurse and let them know that your student is vaccinated, that student and staff attestation form for vaccination is also on our website. So you can go in and fill that out as well, and the nurse will contact you for proof of vaccination. We want to make sure that we have the most accurate number as possible. As you all know, 80% is that magic number that we're striving to get to. We are at 655. Again, 80% for the high school is 707. So we are chipping away at it. We are not quite there yet. The other building where there has been some movement is the middle school. So again, the committee voted to collect staff data once we had 70% of students vaccinated. So you can see here on this dashboard that just student data is reflected here, and the vaccination rate at the middle school is just about 66.5%. We have a low vaccination percentage at our elementary schools, not something anywhere near where we would need to be reporting on that. Mike alluded to the change in the isolation and quarantine guidance from CDC, the ever-changing Department of Public Health and Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary guidance for us. So the quarantine and isolation period over winter break was reduced from 10 days to 5 days. You can see here on the chart, for those that have tested positive, the expectation is that you isolate for 5 days. If you are asymptomatic or are experiencing improvement in your symptoms and are fever-free, you are free to rejoin the rest of the world for the next 5 days wearing a mask. And so I think that that's an important piece to recognize, is that the CDC has made the distinction that if you have been positive or have been in contact with someone that has been quarantining, that has been positive, it has been reduced to 5 days, but it's still a 10-day window. And they're asking that anytime you're around others after those first 5 days that you continue to wear a mask. All of our FAQs and flowcharts on our website have been updated to reflect this guidance. Our nurses have been working with families since the break with this guidance. If you have questions about the timeline for your family, please feel free to reach out to your school nurse, and she can walk you through each of those different scenarios, because everybody's situation is a little bit different. One of the other things I wanted to talk about was student attendance. I didn't put it in my slides, but it is something that there's been a couple questions about. I have seen that we don't use Facebook as a communication channel. We do look at Facebook, and I have seen some comments and questions about there just around student attendance, most specifically about yesterday, but in general. So on a Monday, after a long weekend or after a break, or even any Monday, the absentee rate for students is usually around 12%. Yesterday's absentee rate for students was 16.1% in the district. So that was 412 students absent across 5 buildings. Today, the absentee number is 314 across 5 buildings, so 12.2%, just about where we thought we'd be. Not all of those absences are attributed to COVID-19. For example, at North, 45 students were absent today. There's 11 active COVID cases at North. There's 22 students that are quarantining because of home-based exposure. And then there are 12 students that are sick or absent for another reason. So again, we are not seeing any huge clustering of kids in any one grade, in any one classroom that would necessitate us changing the way we've been delivering instruction for students. Again, you'll remember that the assignments when you're at home and quarantining or isolating are optional. There's no requirement that you do any schoolwork when you are not in school, but they are asynchronous with an opportunity to check in with staff. I did speak with building principals earlier today. It seems that those check-ins are going well. Students know how to access their teacher if there's questions with the work. Again, we're just 1 day out of break. So I think even being the mother of a 7th grader and a 4th grader myself, it takes a minute to get back into the groove after break, even when you're in school. But again, with that shortened isolation and quarantine time, I do think the disruption to education for students is much less than it has been in the past. That's all I have for my update.
Okay, so why don't we go to, I'll go with the committee and then you do have some questions in the chat, Aaron. So why don't we go kind of the order we've been, we'll go David, Susie, Lance, and then Sue. So David, do you want to, any questions or?
No, thank you for the updates. Again, Aaron, I think those numbers where I thought they would probably be. I was a little curious about the teacher attendance, student attendance. The only question I do have is the bus headaches. I just got an update literally right before we went on. If we could maybe address that for a second.
Sure. So again, obviously there's a national shortage of bus drivers. We've been talking about that since the beginning of the school year. And then on top of that, there's also obviously an increase of COVID cases within their workforce. We have been working with First Student around the clock. Many of you with secondary students got an email Sunday evening letting you know, I think bus 54 and bus 2 were being covered or combined by a substitute driver. There's a couple of those instances for tomorrow. I am happy to say that all of our routes are covered. That is not the case in all of the districts around us. So we do have drivers for all of our routes. There are a couple of instances, as David alluded to, where bus routes are combined or there's a substitute driver, but every route is covered. We do have that First View software too. So sometimes when there's a substitute on the route, the bus timing is a little bit different than you're used to. You can log into that First View app and see where the bus is. So it gives you, it's not 100% accurate. So if it says the bus is going to be there at 6:57, don't go outside at 6:57 because it may be there at 6:56. But it does give you a better time frame of when the bus is coming. So if you're on one of those routes that's affected, that's combined or with a substitute driver, I do suggest you do check the app just to make sure that the timing of the pickup and drop off are close to what you're used to so that you can adjust your routine accordingly.
Perfect. No, thank you. I just thought it was something that the question would probably come up from some parents. So as long as we're on top of it, that I think we're okay. Thanks, Mike.
Susie?
Been a while since I've been Zooming. David hit the bus question, which I had. Aaron, you had mentioned that we were originally allocated 900 test kits and we had gotten like 270. Are there any plans for the rest to come to us when they do become available, or do we?
So we were originally supposed to get 450 kits, two tests in each kit.
So 900.
Give everybody in the district a kit. We've received 270. There is talk that the original order will be filled. We just haven't been given a timeline on that. And then I think it's important to think about what the intent of the testing is. So we all have done this. We've all tested for one reason or another, and we all know that the results are only accurate for that moment in time. So I think it's important that families, students, staff continue to monitor their symptoms. I don't know that we're never going to be in a place where there's the resources, the staff or the kits to test everybody every day that wants to test. So I think it's important that we're thoughtful about what the purpose of the testing is. We did have some extra kits, extra tests that were left after the pickup this weekend. We did distribute those to the school nurses so that if there is a staff member that is symptomatic or in need of a test, right? I know that they're very hard to find. The very limited number of tests that we had left did go to the school nurses because we do want folks to be able to test. And as I've said before, the test that we get from the Test and Stay program cannot be used for vaccinated staff or students. That's per DESE. So the extra kits that we have from this weekend does give us some flexibility with the ability to offer tests to vaccinated staff that feel as though they've been exposed and are in need or are symptomatic.
Okay, thank you. And let me just check my notes here. I think because David hit the bus question, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Lance?
Yeah, mine was getting clarity on the bus situation as well. So I'm all set. Thank you.
Great.
I'll put in a plug. First Student is looking to hire drivers. So if you or someone you know is interested in driving the bus, they're always looking for new staff over there.
And if you have questions about it, please, Tracy Marino, I know, would be happy to answer any questions. I think she's put the request out there a couple of times. We've actually talked about it in these meetings. Clearly, this is a something that we monitor as we go through the school year. Sue?
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious. I keep thinking it's probably like a nerve-wracking time for a lot of the staff. And are any of the staff utilizing the KN95 masks, or is it really not need?
Yeah, so we did have them here out for staff that came to get test kits so they could grab them then as well. Again, as I mentioned, they are in each of the nurse's office in the building. I have seen more staff than before wearing KN95 masks. I will say they are quite thick, obviously, for the job that they're intended to do. It is difficult, I would say, for a teacher to stand in front of the room with the KN95 mask on for 6.5 hours and deliver content. But I have seen an increase in staff wearing them than we had before, because we did have those available to staff last year as well. So there are more staff wearing them now than last year.
Okay. Thanks. That's all I had. Thank you.
Great. Actually, Erin, thanks, Sue. Two things real quick. Erin, can you just touch on the information about whether these masks that this Commonwealth passed out? There was a news article, I think, last night or this morning about it. And could you just talk real briefly about, I know students are now home only 5 days on a close contact, but there's still the supports that are available. Just touch on it really quickly for those who may not have seen a previous meeting.
Sure. So obviously there has been a lot of conversation on media outlets, both about the test kits as well as the masks. So just to clarify, the test kits that we received here in Pembroke have an expiration date of June 2nd, 2022. I know there are some districts that received test kits that expired in November. That is not the case here in Pembroke. The masks that you have seen, I do have a package here. These are the same KN95 masks that all districts received. I do know there has been some feedback on media outlets about the efficacy of the mask. Governor Baker did come out yesterday and say that they did have the masks tested at MIT and they were proven to be 85% effective. Similar to any topic, I believe whatever you want it to be, you can find on the internet. And I do, we are appreciative of the state giving us this upgraded mask option for folks. There are still people wearing blue surgical masks. There are still people wearing cloth masks. I think in each of those instances, you can go on to the internet and find a yay or a nay or a pro or a con for either of those things. But I do think, there is an added layer of security for staff that are looking for some additional protection with the KN95 mask. As far as supports available to students that are at home or quarantining, again, returning from break is slow even when you're in school, but the structure that we have set up at all the levels is asynchronous work through Google Classroom or Seesaw, depending upon the level that your student is, with an opportunity to check in with a staff member. That is more defined at the elementary level. For example, Mrs. Greer is available from 2 to 2:30, or, here's a Google Meet, join me. At the secondary level, because students have upwards of 6 or 7 content or classroom teachers that they're looking to contact with, teachers have posted when they're available, and students can also email their teacher and say, hey, I'm stuck on this, can you, reach out to me? And they set up a time. A lot of that time is after school for folks, but there are, during Titan time, there's some opportunities, and some staff have some flexibility within their day. Our administrators have been really good about providing coverage for staff if there's a group of students that they need to check in, whether it's a lunch or recess coverage or whatnot. What we shared on the 21st at your meeting was what we would do if we had a big number of students in any one grade or any one school, like at the high school and middle school level, as far as increased support for students. We're not at that point yet in any one of our buildings, but that presentation is on our website, and I'll just kind of talk you through. It was a more defined structure for students. So if we had, let's say 15 kids in grade 6 that were quarantining, pulling that and creating almost a Google Classroom and assigning a staff member to that, whether it's a support staff member or a substitute, or having, freeing up some more time within a teacher's day to actually focus and work with those students. At the secondary level, we talked about using the National Honor Society tutors during Titan time for an opportunity for students at home to check in and get support with some of their work, as well as creating a schedule like we had previously last year around, at period 1, there's a high school science teacher available. Period 2, there's a high school math teacher, so that students, if they were struggling with an assignment, it may not be your actual classroom teacher, but it would be a content specific teacher for students to check in with troubles with assignments. And again, our teachers have been amazing. They make themselves available before, after school, any free time they have during the day, they're working with students. And we do have staff that are live streaming. Again, that's not the expectation. It is difficult to manage both students in front of you and students on a virtual platform. So we are understanding and appreciative of that, but there are some teachers that just want to know exactly where a student is at with the work so that they can seamlessly rejoin the classroom when they come back from isolation or quarantine. So that's happening in some places as well.
Thanks, Aaron. You want to hit the questions that came into the
Yep.
chat?
I sure do. I'm going to go in the order that they came in. If I answer it, I'm not going to repeat it, if that's okay with everybody. So the first question was around staff cases. The staff cases include all building-based staff. So whether it's the principal, it's the custodian, it's the cafeteria worker, it's a teacher, it's a paraprofessional, they are all included in that. The only numbers that are not included in our staff are bus drivers. So again, the bus drivers are not employees of Pembroke Public Schools, they're employees of First Student. So we don't track their health information in our dashboard. There's been a little back and forth in the chat box, it looks like, about the validity of at-home tests. So again, at the suggestion of our nurses, anytime we have a family that has a positive test result on a rapid test, we always recommend that you follow up with a PCR test. I know that there's some varying levels of information out there, whether it's from your pediatrician or from your own healthcare provider, on whether or not, if you're symptomatic, it makes sense to get a PCR test or not. Our nurses are probably the best one to talk with you about your individual family's case and situation. I do know that they always recommend that you follow up with a PCR, but I did hear earlier in the week that some pediatricians are saying if you're symptomatic and you're positive on a rapid, you know, you have COVID, and the availability of PCR testing around locally is pretty tight nowadays. I think people are waiting 4 or 5 days for a PCR test. So I know Lisa has talked before about rapid tests. We've talked as a committee about rapid tests and PCR tests and what the gold standard is. Again, similar to masking, if you go on the internet, you can find science that debates or supports what you feel is an accurate test. We are, taking families at their word that they have a positive rapid test at home. We're not asking for a picture of the test or anything like that. Same with staff.
Erin, I think the next question is on test to stay. Can you just real quickly, 30, 45 seconds on what test to stay is? Because some people, again, may not be aware, may have forgotten what the test to stay program is.
Sure. So again, I'm going to go over it in 30 seconds. The information is on our website and it is updated to reflect the change to the 5 days. So again, the test and stay program is for any unvaccinated student or staff member that's identified as a close contact at school. So if you are sitting next to somebody in 3rd grade that is positive and you have been within 3 feet of them for 15 minutes or more over the course of the day, that's the bar for close contact in the school setting. If that is the case and a student or staff member is identified as a close contact, they have the opportunity or the option to either traditionally quarantine at home as outlined through the protocol, or participate in test and stay. So test and stay is you come into school each morning, you receive a by next now rapid antigen test. If your test is negative, you're able to rejoin your class and stay for the day. Originally, you needed to test for 7 days for the test and stay program, 7 school days. Now that is 5 school days, given the change in the quarantining and isolation guidance. So we are unable to give test and stay kits to vaccinated students and staff. That is per DESE because of the availability of the kits. They're not to be used for symptomatic testing or for pool testing. They're specifically for test and stay. We don't participate here in Pembroke in symptomatic or pool testing, but our kits are really only for students and unvaccinated students and staff identified as close contacts in a classroom setting or sports. So they did extend the use of the kits to high school sports and extracurricular activities. Again, not youth sports, but any school-sponsored activity falls under the test and stay program. So just a question about vaccination rates of staff. So what you can see on that slide that I shared with you is that 87 of 106 staff members at PHS have self-identified as vaccinated. That is above the 80%. So, we did poll teachers back in the spring of last year when vaccines were first becoming available, whether their intent was to vaccinate or not. I know that the PTA has polled teachers as well. I believe our vaccination rate for teachers to be upwards close to 88 to 90%. Again, there is no database for teacher vaccination, so it is self-reporting or the self-attestation like I talked about earlier for staff, but the staff at the high school have reported at a greater than 80% vaccination rate. So we did not set, this is a question about the number that would trigger additional support. So we talked about at the elementary level, 10 in a classroom. We talked about at the secondary level, the middle school, it's more of a team approach. So if we were looking at, upwards of 50 kids on a team or in any one specific area. At the high school, it's obviously, there's so many courses and so many options for students. It's spread out across a lot of staff. But looking at the case numbers, if we got to a place where we were, having upwards of 20% of the building quarantining or isolating, we'd look at putting that structure back into place. That defined support structure for folks for the transfer kids. So 45 active cases at the high school is over 4 grades. So there's not any one program of study that has more students that are positive than others. So, I think if you were to ask a high school staff member, they're seeing a sprinkling of students in their classroom, 1, 2, 3, depending on the grade level or the content that they teach. Algebra 1 versus AP Calc is probably a little bit of a different number when you're talking about students absent for isolation or quarantine. We don't have a critical mass of any students in any grade or in any school at this point.
Aaron, one you may have popped over about the bus drivers. First student cannot tell us, if I understand this correctly, they cannot tell us if a bus driver is out because of COVID or anything. They can't even tell us if a bus driver is sick or what the sickness is, any of that stuff, because they're not our employees. They can't share that information, which is why we can't report on the cases. Clearly, right. Obviously, we do treat them as an extension of staff, but they're not our employees, so they don't fall under what we can or cannot report. I should say what we can report on them. Clearly, what we can't is there.
Sure. The next question is about, do unvaccinated quarantine students need to provide a negative test in order to return on day 6? That's not required. Obviously, it's recommended, but as we've said in the past, and as our protocols spell out on the website, it's not required. It is required that they continue to wear a mask. Again, in the school setting, they're wearing a mask anyways. But on day 6, for day 6 through 10, that you'd be wearing a mask in all settings if you were previously quarantining or isolating for COVID positivity or exposure. So some of the questions in the chat box aren't actual questions. So I'm just gonna kind of work through and hit the ones that are questions that I'm able to answer or feel comfortable answering. I know that everybody has a bit of a different stance on vaccines, vaccination, test kits, and masks. But the purpose of this is to supply accurate, timely information to folks. So those are the types of questions that I'll focus on. If I didn't answer your question and you're really, really needing an answer, feel free to email me on the side, or Mary Beth or Jess if it's more suitable to their arena, or even scinfo@pembrokek12.org. I will share those questions with school committee. But just going through some of these, there are a few that I would be unable to answer. Again, best practices, obviously our nurses would tell you it is a best practice to test before coming to school, whether that's when you're coming off quarantine, whether that's a PCR or a rapid test, but it is not required to return. So yes, the bus drivers are the same as the van drivers. We do contract with a number of transportation providers for our special education student transportation. They are not employees of Pembroke Public Schools, so if a van driver is absent, I wouldn't know whether it was COVID related or for some other reason. I think that was everything that was in there. Just making sure I didn't miss anything. I think that's all that was in there.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Aaron. Again, if people have information, scinfo or directly to you, to ask any of the questions. I'll be real quick on the last because it just came in again. It cannot be changed because van drivers and bus drivers are not our employees. Bringing transportation in-house would cost, I'm not sure how many buses. We just priced out buses, would cost us somewhere, how many millions of dollars would it cost to buy the buses and then employ the bus drivers and then have pools of backups. It's really not practical, which is why very few districts, I think even Boston, I don't know, Aaron, they contract bus out. Do you know any do you know any districts in Eastern Massachusetts that do busing internally? Just because it's an overall the cost, and it's a challenge to get drivers.
There are a couple of small districts that do it. And again, access to transportation is on a very high fee structure or exclusively for those over 2 miles from school. As far as special ed transportation, we have, a number of vans. I think there's about 45 vans, either transporting kids to our schools or to out of district placements. That is something that would be very difficult for us to internalize at this time.
Yeah, it's something that can't be put into a contract because it's HIPAA law. So it's health information privacy. I don't know what all HIPAA stands, all the words HIPAA stands for, but that's ultimately what it comes down to. They cannot share that information. Okay, someone just said Middleborough in-house for at least the mini buses, right? We had looked at special education transportation, taking that internally at least at one point. Again, van drivers are even tougher to get than bus drivers. They're advertising all the time, but again, it's not something we could even put into the contract with any of those providers because they can't share the information because of HIPAA. Now, it would be up if a student wants to share, they can. Clearly, they would have to tell us potentially for close contacts. There was a potential of close contact, but then even then there's some privacy that has to be maintained.
Right, so keep in mind for the CDC and the Department of Public Health and DESE joint guidance, there are not close contacts on school transportation when students are masked on the transportation with the windows even partially cracked or the roof hatch opened. So there's not a lot of contact tracing, and the driver on a traditional school bus is several feet away from the students. The vans I know are a little bit tighter. I do want everybody to know in each of our contracts, both with First Student as well as any individual transportation provider for special education, there are COVID protocols. So I don't want anyone to think because they don't have to tell us if someone has COVID that they're not following the 5 days or the testing or the quarantining. All of that is spelled out in our contracts. The requirements that we hold them to are very similar to what we hold our own students and staff to, if not a little bit more stricter, just depending upon the nature of the service they provide.
Thanks, Erin. Okay, so again, if anyone has specific questions, please reach out to the superintendent, your building principal, or scinfo@pembrokek12.org.
There's a question about absences, Mike.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you look at any one of our student handbooks, you'll see that there is a traditional attendance policy, that is governed by state law as far as when we need to notify folks about absences. I think the first letter goes out after the 5th day. There's a, subsequent contact depending on the numbers of days. Similar to last year, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has asked that you waive your attendance policy for credit purposes. So if you have a high school student, in years past, if you missed a certain number of days in a semester or a term, you were unable to receive credit for that course. That doesn't exist any longer because we are asking families at the first site of illness to keep their student home. We do still need to follow the state regulations as far as notifying people of absences. So you may have received a note if your son or daughter was absent for more than 5 days or 7 days or 10 days or a call from the school. We do still need to go through the checklist, but there are no repercussions on the school end for absences. There's no such thing as excused or unexcused at this point as we're working through what COVID scenarios look like for students and families.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on from there and go to what was the initial intent of tonight's meeting, which was to go over what has been deemed the Kingston Letter. So if at our last meeting, we had a discussion with regard to a letter that the Kingston School Committee sent to the Department of Education. They were asking 2 things within the letter. First, they were asking for the metrics in order to the metrics that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, otherwise known as DESE for those not familiar, are using to determine the masking requirement, the one that was put in at the end of August, reiterated in, I believe, was October, November, and would be, was put in place at least until January 15th of this year. So they asked for that, and they also asked again for local control if there was a situation where that that the metrics weren't available or they weren't going to make any changes. So what the committee tasked myself to do was to modify the Kingston letter so it could come from Pembroke, because there's some specific things in there from Kingston, some of the things that didn't align with what I thought the intent of this committee was when they went to when we went to talk about it. So obviously Kingston is a K-6 district. We are a pre-K through 12 district. There's also things in there with regard to Silver Lake, and then some things that didn't align with what the committee had talked about when we met in December. Erin, I can't share. So you disabled sharing. So do you want, which I know why, can you share that?
I'm gonna let you share. Hold on.
Hold on.
So I think you should be able to share now, Mike.
I can. So let me. Hold on. Now I have to let Zoom. Sorry. Something for Zoom not allowing me to share now. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about all this. Erin, you may have to because it's not on. It's some setting on my MacBook.
Yep.
Can you?
I'm opening
sorry.
it. Give me 1 sec. Yep.
Yeah. So when Erin goes through, we'll walk through each of the paragraphs relatively quickly. Again, it's at this point, clearly we're looking for, again, two things, either the metrics that they're using to determine it or to give us back local control so that we can look at it based upon local health data. Clearly, the local health data is higher than we've anticipated, than we've seen in the past. But you know, the hope is we get past this and move on, which would again put us to where we're looking for with you know, bringing back local control. So with that, I'll walk through paragraph by paragraph, then I'll ask if anyone in the committee has a comment or change you want to make. I think everybody's had the chance to look at the initial version and then a version that Sue added a paragraph. So the first paragraph, pretty straightforward, just an introduction of what we're asking, change Kingston to Pembroke, and that's pretty much it. Any questions or comments? I would expect nothing on this one. All right, just please speak up. So change recent letter to continually stated, because at this point that we're probably about 4 to 6 weeks past Kingston sending this out. Actually, I think it's close to 8 weeks now. So rather than referring to a letter, which is way in the past, made modifications to that, you know, took out really the pieces to the letter. And then again, the pieces where Kingston is different than Pembroke. Questions or thoughts or comments on this? David, your face is the only one I can't see, so I need you either to speak up or stay silent. We'll move on.
No, I'm good, Mike. I'll let you know if I have a comment. I'm fine right now.
Perfect, thank you. Okay,
Mike,
so
I have
now, sure, go ahead, Sue.
Just with the second paragraph, as we talk mid-paragraph about the absence of a formal, detailed, and well-communicated criteria for unmasking, I just, as I read it, and I think it's probably a follow-up conversation when we get a response, but I just wanted to put it out there because we do have, by solving this problem, we create another problem that some families have mentioned at earlier meetings of once we unmask, anybody not unmasked, there's a perception or an outing of the fact that they may or may not be vaccinated. So I look for some input from DESA on that particular piece because we get into that slippery slope of basically revealing someone's private business, which we've worked pretty hard not to do. So what, you know, I just wanted to mention it because it made me think of it in this paragraph. I don't think it's important to put in this instance, but when we get a response, because I'm very hopeful we'll get one, my hope is we may have to follow up and ask for guidance on that particular piece, because I believe we're going to hit the number. I believe we'll ultimately get to unmasking. But if we've got unvaccinated folks and they're still walking around with masks, by solving one problem, we've created another. And I want some guidance from Dessa on that. Fair enough?
Yep, it's fair.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other comments in there?
So
Okay.
quick, I just would
Yep.
ask Susie, so what you're saying is a follow-up letter, we would ask that question. Do I understand that correctly?
I think so, because I want to give them a chance to, we're asking for a detailed response on this, the stepping out of being masked. And I'd like to assume they'll address it in that response. So I don't think we need to change it or add and get into that level of detail here, because I'm making an assumption, and I know the old saying, but at the same time, I don't think that's the first time that's been asked. There's been any number of discussions around HIPAA and HIPAA violations. That's my background. I used to be the crazy insurance lady. I look at that, and I am looking to sign on to this letter with the very real assumption that the people making these decisions are also assessing the risk involved with any decision that they're making, the liability aspect of this. And that is a liability. We've had families talk about this in meetings. So I guess I'm putting it on record that my expectation is that component, that part of our families, our constituents, the people in this community are worried about, is their privacy. And we have tried really, really hard through all of this to protect the privacy of everybody. And I want to make sure that, because people make assumptions. We see it. We talked about social media. We talk about the bullying component and people saying, well, because you're still wearing a mask, you must not be vaccinated. You're the reason we're not having a prom. We've heard this stuff. We've read this stuff. Just because we've read it doesn't make it true. But that doesn't stop the problems that type of conversation and dialogue and texting or whatever causes. So I want to make sure it's really clear and on the record that I have a very real expectation from the people at the state level that are sending down guidance to us, that they are indeed considering that aspect of this. And I know this is not my typical jovial tone, because I am really, really, really tired of COVID. And I can assure you, everybody on this call, everybody in this town, we've all had it. And so I'm making no bones. This is a side of Susie Scholl you don't normally see, but I am expecting the decision makers that are laying down the law to us to consider every aspect of it. I don't know, have I made myself clear? Does that answer the question? I'm still a happy-go-lucky person.
Crystal clear. Thank you.
I am demanding that as part of the response. And I think on tape now, I've made it very clear that that's my expectation, that they're thinking about everything, not reacting, not just throwing stuff out there, that they're really thinking this time.
So I understand it. And I'm I've been critical of how they've made decisions and the timing and just some of the things I think could have been done better, right? And you could judge everything that everyone has done better over the past 21 months.
Right,
Or I should say now we're in month 22, potentially month 23, depending upon when we were starting to talk about it as early as February of 2020. So I get all those pieces. The one thing I do think, or I believe, is they have they've worked on the information that they have. We may not agree with the decision that they've taken, the data they've had, but they've done what they can do based upon the information they have at that time, right?
And I agree. I agree. And I'm not saying, I just am trying to protect our staff. I'm trying to protect the students. A lot of people will continue to want to wear masks, and that's got to be okay. And people, so I'm trying to be fair to everybody and on all sides of this issue. And I guess that's where I am. So I'm not angry at anybody. I'm just, I just want to make sure that I'm really clear, because sometimes when I am a little more lighthearted, I don't know if it's, I don't want people to think I'm not serious about this, I guess is where I am. Sorry. Sorry for vacation. And
so let me kind of get to the crux of what we're trying to do here.
Thanks.
Is there something you would add or think we should add or think we should remove as we go through these pieces?
And I thought about that as I was putting this particular notation on this particular paragraph, but I think, I hesitate to get too far into the weeds on the letter, because then there's so much detail. I think, in fairness to the folks at the state level, recognizing what you just said, I think this letter hits, there are parts of this letter, I feel like it hits what we need initially. And I'm trying to be fair and stepping back and saying, I have expectations of what I want in their response. I don't know if Kingston has gotten a response. So
no,
I'm hopeful that piece will be, I think my point was just to make sure that piece was considered in it, because of what we've heard families say on both sides of this issue. It's a tough world right now, and folks, because they've had it, you just saw me kind of look like I'm escalating. There's a lot of folks are not who they were 2 years ago, because this is rough. And I just, that's kind of my point.
We've talked about it. I think we've talked about a couple of times. There's been a few different communications that have gone out from committees on this topic and on other topics, right? I mean, this is clearly emotional, and there's lots of opinions, lots of studies, and lots of studies, lots of opinions, and a lot of educated opinions of people who do this all the time. The part I'll say though is I don't think, and Erin, correct me if I'm wrong, at least I haven't heard or seen a district report getting a response to any of their communications on this. Right. I think Sandwich also sent something. I think it was at least one or two districts down the Cape who has sent something, and a couple others. And this is on, I'd say both sides, but in some cases there's more than two sides to the issue. So I don't think that they are responding at all to any inquiries. It's at least saying, because the one thing let me rephrase, the one thing we talked about on the 21st, it was, we don't know what the bar is. And this goes back to April of 2020, when the governor said we're out of school now indefinitely, which was at the time the right decision. The question was, back then, what was the criteria to get back in school, and they didn't have one. And then it was in the fall of that year, okay, you should go until you are red, but then also consider these other statistics on remote versus hybrid. So I don't know if we've seen anything with regard to clear guidance. So if we're going to ask where we can. Okay, so with that, Sue, this was the paragraph that you added. Do you want to talk about it? And I know, Lance, you have an opinion on it.
Yeah, so here's my, let me just say where I'm coming from with this paragraph. And I probably worded it a bit stronger than it needs to be in this letter, but it's because of my frustration with this whole process. I felt like Erin had come up with a really good plan at the beginning of the school year for our district. And we had a very well thought out plan ready to go, whether or not to mask the kids, and if the numbers got to a certain level, what we were going to do. It was very well thought out. And I just feel that there's so much overreach here, government overreach, and I'm just so frustrated with it. Along with that, by the way, I'm fully vaccinated, and I just got over COVID, and other members of my household did as well, who are also fully vaccinated. And I know lots of people in the same position because this is just rampant. Like, you know, it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not, you can still get COVID. So I understand that, you know, people want to get the vaccine. People should be able to make this choice for their growing children without this kind of government overreach. And I just feel like it's very unfair. It's very similar to the whole thing we were talking about back in December. Like, it's just unfair. They're taking this decision away from families. And I feel like as a town and as a district, we already had a really good plan in place. And so I wrote this paragraph because I was a little bit frustrated with the whole thing. I don't see I'm looking on the CDC website, and the only thing I see there are cohort studies about masks and masking and their effectiveness. There aren't any randomized control studies showing that, other than N95 masks or surgical masks, there's no studies on there that show that cloth masks are effective and, you know, against the spread. It's not saying the opposite either, but, you know, show me a study. Like, if they were showing me a study on the CDC, like that was an actual randomized control study, I would be like, okay, well, maybe we should mask. That's not what they're doing. And it's frustrating because our kids are the ones who are, you know, having to deal with it. We can walk into the grocery store without a mask. We can walk everywhere else in the state without a mask, but our poor kids have to walk around with masks. And we say it's because we want to reduce the spread, but vaccinated and unvaccinated people can both spread COVID. I just don't understand why we're differentiated when anybody can get it. And anyone can spread it. Like, how is it any different if you're vaccinated? I know. And so with that, that's why I wrote this paragraph, because I feel like people are taking away our rights. You know, not every state in the union is masking their kids in school. In fact, most aren't. This is like Massachusetts, California, like, you know, New York, some of these bigger states along the coast or whatever. It's not the whole country, and they don't have different numbers than us, you know. So I'm frustrated that there's this overreach with no explanation whatsoever. They just said, okay, you get a mask until we're 80% vaccinated, with no explanation whatsoever. And I just think it's unfair. I feel like our letter is not strong enough. Like, it's asking for data, what the off ramp is, but I just feel like it's not strong enough. So maybe some of this can be taken out. And I do realize that I wrote it in a bit of anger, but, you know, I feel like we need to really press them. The fact that they haven't answered any of the letters from the other districts is disrespectful, in my opinion. It just is.
Can I just clarify two things? First, you know, someone put it in the chat, and I actually did know, because Brian Lynch did share that Middleborough did get a response to their letter. It was a reference back to the August 25th letter that was sent to all districts. So no new guidance or information has been shared with districts.
And
I also want to let you know that I've shut off the chat function for folks to be able to chat with each other. So if you have a question, it'll come directly to me. I'm happy to share with the committee the transcript of the log after the meeting, and I will repeat any questions that are there for us to answer. But this seems like there's a fair amount of going back and forth between certain chat people that it's not necessarily relative to what you guys are discussing as a committee. So just so that you're aware.
Thanks, Erin, for that clarification. I was unaware of Middleborough, but thank you. Lance, why don't jump in, because I think you have an opinion on this, and then I'll then I'll bounce back to David, Susie, sorry.
Absolutely. And Sue, I appreciate your passion on this. I'm with you. I think there's lots of frustration through this whole process, right? No matter where we are in this. My encouragement would be, though, we had two kind of key focus areas, right? One is to get a clear understanding of their plan and how do we move that forward. And Susie, I strongly concur. My nervousness is definitely about that process of coming back and what the masking versus unmasking groups and the segmentation that could create. So that's definitely something that's strong on my mind. So hopefully that gets answered. If it does get answered, like you said, it's the state. Are we going to get an answer? Who knows? But I think what we need to do as a committee is speak for our community, right? And that's why we're here. So I think it's important that we send a letter. Whether we get a response or not is not up to us. Our job is to speak on behalf of our families. And so I think it's important we do that. And so really the two key points that I hope we have are focusing on getting an answer, and then hopefully potentially getting control back to the local communities. Because as now, obviously things are challenging for most of the state, and we understand that through the holiday situation. But hopefully things settle back down as they did in the fall, and we'll be in a place, potentially in a better place than some of the other communities, and hopefully have an opportunity to make a decision based on what's going on in our community. And so I think that's important. I do have concern that, Sue, as you said, this could be a strong paragraph that could upset folks, and obviously some of that is okay. They need to hear things, but as you said, it's tough when we get into the weeds. So I would encourage us to stay as high level as we can, but still get our point across, and really get to our two key points of, hey, we need an answer and we need a plan, and share that with us, and then we'd like control. So that's sort of my sense on that.
Thanks, Lance. David, anything you want to add? You haven't said anything, at least through this section.
Yeah, no, I want to say, listening to this, and I see the passion on all sides, and I want to thank the people that are kind of in the audience, for lack of a better term. There are opposing views on this, and agreeing with Lance here, we need answers. I feel like, and I hate to use the term a game, not that I look at this as a game, but I feel like the rules of the game keep changing, or if they're going to change, they're not telling us about it till, kind of like before tip-off, for lack of a better term. So I find it frustrating. I'm hoping we get an answer. I'm hoping, there's a certain amount. I've always said you can't legislate decency. I think people will still wear masks, some won't. I think Sue raised a good point. You walk into Stop and Shop, some people have masks on, some people don't. Everybody's fine. You look at other parts of the country, they're doing things different ways. I just think we're going to hopefully try to get their attention. I'm honestly not optimistic we'll get a response. I hope we don't anger some members of our community, which I think we're going to. And I think there's going to be some people who will support this 100% with us. So I'll give you that as my 2 cents.
Great, thanks, David. So a couple things here. Number one, I think one of the things as we look at this particular issue, I don't know, at least the intent going in was to find out what the data is and then to ask for local control. The reason why, at least in my opinion, is 2 things. Is they're treating the entire Commonwealth the same. And when you look at it, right, we have urban and we have rural communities, and you also have out into the Berkshires, where if you've ever worked with any of their school committee members or administrators or anything like that, I've had the ability to work with some of them on the MIA committees. It's different, and we're all different. Treating, Springfield the same as Pembroke or Lawrence, the same as Hanover, is a challenge. But I understand that when the powers to be in Malden and in Boston have to make their decisions, they have to look at it across. And that's one of the things that I think why we're trying to get to what's your toll gate to get out. They gave it us 80% vaccination rate, great. But is there another, right? Because if 80% vaccination rate, but cases go down and everything else. And by the way, I completely get the passion, and I know there's lots of opinions. And again, doing some research today, just try to get myself even more educated than all the other things that I've read on this. There's even contradictory things now. So I understand it. I understand where we're trying to go, but to me, our intent was to get data on the toll gate to get out, and then ask for, again, local control if we, either or. To me is where we're trying to get. When I looked at this paragraph, so, and I applaud the passion, because anyone who's passionate on a topic, regardless of position, it's good, because it's always good to take a stand. As much as people who would be opposed to what you said, again, I like the passion. The challenge I have here is a couple of things. It starts to get into vaccination mandates, which they haven't indicated. Don't know if they're going to indicate, and then that's a different discussion for a different time. The the studies that are out there, we know, because we had this, and we talked about this back in August, I'm sure everybody can remember, you know, there were studies for, studies against, there are studies, you know, there's studies after study, but the data is inconclusive or short term. And everybody can say, oh no, this study is conclusive and it came from this source. Yeah, it's great. But I know when I'm looking at data in my industry, we look for a minimum of 3 years. Hopefully we don't have to get 3 years of data for COVID, but there's some of the data with regard to masking that it is so short and the cycle is so small, who knows what it means. And that's positive and negative. So that's kind of the point I'm looking at here, or thought that I have here, or as I'm thinking through this. As I read that and kind of read what you're saying is, you know, as much as we could say a study, they can have a study. And then the last is, you know, the one part is, yeah, Jeff Riley, Governor Baker, neither one of them are PhDs. However, I think Aaron's told us several times that they do have a medical staff at DESE that they've been using. In fact, I think, if I recall from one of the times I've looked at it, those names are all on the DESE website, or they're on the Commonwealth website. Yeah, so they do have, you know, whether it be pediatricians, whether it be, you know, infectious disease experts, they have a staff that they're looking at that's using the data they have. So that's why I looked at this, and I kind of thought it was a little bit outside of what our original scope was. If the committee wants to keep it, then that's something we'll have to look at individually. But I don't know, I think it just, it changes the focus of where we were headed. That's just my opinion. Anyone else, David or Sue, or Sue or Susie, want to come back with anything? I know you started, but we can let you finish. Have you heard everybody else?
I think what Lance and what you said kind of ties into what I was saying about the earlier paragraph. I don't want to include my commentary up there because it's more in the weeds. And I think, although some valid points have been brought up, this is more detailed in the weeds. And I think we have to give them an opportunity to answer kind of what our original intent was. So, you know, I admire the passion on this paragraph, and I understand where the line of questioning is coming from, but this might be more detail that I'm hoping will come once we hit a certain point, and they'll have had an opportunity to develop the details to maybe answer some of those questions at a secondary level. Not secondary, it's a bad choice of words, but in a next pass kind of a thing, when they've had some more time, especially given what's happened in the last 2 weeks with numbers. Does that make sense?
I can only hope, Susie, that they actually do answer us and give us some data points and some studies that they've used to determine these numbers. I think really that's where my frustration comes from, is that they haven't. And, you know, you're right, we have to focus on the letter and getting a response. And this is clearly not going to get a response because I was kind of angry when I wrote it. But you see my point, and I just, you know, I am passionate about it. And I just like everyone else, I want COVID to end. I just hope they just haven't given us any reasoning, which makes it very frustrating to me. Like if they had started off by saying like, oh, an 80% vaccination rate because, you know, studies have proven that, you know, this is going to cause herd immunity and blah, blah, blah. And the mask wearing, you know, this study shows that it works and blah, blah. They didn't do any of that. They didn't give us anything. They just said, here it is. And then to know that they're not responding to any of the letters from other districts with these same concerns, that we can do a better job at a local level, makes it even more frustrating. But I do understand that it is a strongly worded paragraph that, you know, many people won't agree with all the points of. So I totally understand that. And, you know, hopefully if they do respond in the next round of letters that we send, we can include, you know, like, you know, some responses based on that instead. So.
Fair. So at this point, does anyone object to removing it?
I'm okay with it.
Okay, so why don't, Thanks, Sue. And by the way, I completely understand and believe me, I'm glad you're feeling better, as well as others. I think we all know people who are going through this now at different levels. Some it's mild and some it's not so mild. So it's a scary situation. And just to one thing, because it came up a couple times in discussion, we are talking about students clearly, and they're the biggest part of our population, something we all care very deeply about, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But there's also staff members too, that we have to consider and respect, within this, that, we're looking at when we look at this whole thing, just so that people don't feel as though we've forgotten them as we talk through. So, okay, so what we can do is we'll strike that. Okay, so the next paragraph referred to which I struck, which referred to a Kaiser Family Foundation study. I just didn't think it fell within our objective from what we were talking about on the two pieces of data we're trying to get. You see in the next paragraph, removed Silver Lake in Kingston and replaced Pembroke Public Schools regulatory monitors, which we do, in everything we do within the district for our safety protocols, which we've talked about several times. The next paragraph after that, I'll actually take these three together. The next paragraph did not touch, it was pretty specific. It did ask for what they're looking at for data, just so we understand as far as the studies. And then the last paragraph did not change. Again, looking for transparency. So let me stop there. Any comments on those three paragraphs? Okay. Erin, can you go down to what I struck? I took out the paragraph going back to the August decision. The difference between the governor's statement on, I think, was the 20th and the action on the 24th. Reason why it really didn't add to what we were trying to get out of the comments. Not sure if anybody had a comment about keeping that. And then the last was just reiterating our request from them about data on the criteria besides vaccination rates and for local control. So I'll stop there. Other comments on those last sections? Okay. That said, is there a motion to send the letter as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by David, second by Lance. Further discussion or comment on this? Okay. We are remote, so we have to do all votes by roll call. So I'll do them in order of seniority I did before. David?
Yes.
Susie?
Yes.
Lance?
Yes.
Sue? You are on mute?
You're on mute, Sue.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm yes. I can read lips, but also for the voice roll call. Okay, so that is set and that will go out and it is signed by us individually. With that, we didn't have any other business on the agenda. Again, it was more to give an update based on where we are. If numbers do change or situation does change, the superintendent will get out information. And if we need to, we will figure out another way to communicate, or what can we do in order to make sure we get information out accurately. If you have questions, again, reach out to your building principal, reach out to the administration. SC Info is an option for you to get up-to-date information. We ask you to do that. Just get it from the source. Last thing we'll do is I'll do a quick plug. Next Monday night, there'll be a communication going out, discussion on school safety that the superintendent will be doing with the police chief, Rick McDonald. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions ahead of time that will be incorporated in the presentation, and then they'll take open questions about school safety, mainly in response to some of the things that we saw over the months of November and December, just to give some feedback on what we are doing to keep all the kids safe. Erin, anything you want to add on that one real quick?
So the letter will go out tomorrow for folks with the login information and then where to send questions ahead of time. I'll be joined by Chief Rick McDonald, our school resource officer, Steve Kirby, and then there is a liaison from the FBI that will also be bringing kind of a national kind of insight to the conversation and, you know, talking with us about some best practices in other parts of the country. So,
You know, clearly that's recorded for people who can't make it. Great, thank you, Aaron. Okay, so at 8:50, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Motion by Susie, second by Sue. By roll call, David,
Yes.
Susie,
Yes.
I just gotta change names. Lance, Sue,
yes.
and I'm yes. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will speak again on the 25th.